There are many types of cold in this life, from the biting, frosty shiver of the winter wind through to the comforting cool of a fountain of water. Tonight, we will be discussing the other kind of cold. The cold that is rarely brought up in polite circles, except for those rare occasions when God-fearing folk come together in the night and whisper tales to each other to explain exactly why man fears the night. Tonight, we will be contemplating the chill of the soul. Any man who claims not to have felt it at least once in his lifetime is either a liar or such a dullard as to be simply insensitive to those feelings, tremors, or other indicators that mundane existence is being encroached from beyond. I must first place a healthy warning on this tale, for before this short telling is over, dear reader, mark my words, you will believe in ghosts. This particular tale takes place on a Tuesday. There is, of course, no supernatural significance to this, as we all can attest that Tuesday is a weekly occurrence. Nevertheless, this particular Tuesday had both personal and eldritch connotations beyond simply being the day after Monday. I was younger than I am now, not that much in actuality, but in emotional growth and maturity. I like to think that I'm very much older now, mostly due to my narrow brush with otherworldly denizens in the wee early hours of this Tuesday morning. I was stumbling home, alone, after yet another unsuccessful night on the town to try and find meaning in my somewhat lackluster existence. As was often the case, my mind began to wander, and I meandered along in a semi-conscious haze, confident that my well-trained feet would find my way home. This reverie was broken by the unfamiliar feel of dirt beneath my boots instead of the accustomed bitumen. I had walked this path 100 times before, and therefore was more than a little surprised to discover that I was quite suddenly and seemingly irrevocably lost. I had somehow managed upon an unfamiliar road. I turned around to try and retrace my steps, but to my surprise could not even see the lights from the city center. A wind blew and a night bird sang out its eerie cry. I looked down at my watch. 1 a.m. The hairs on the back of my neck rose, and my shoulders bunched up. I have never sobered so quickly in my life. The wind blew again, and this time the chill cut through me like a knife. My heart started to beat. Despite not knowing where I was, I resumed my pace, but now my strides were purposeful, driven by unnamed dread. I fought the urge to start running, but to the casual observer, I was no doubt traveling at a pace akin to a steady jog. It seemed impossible for it to get any colder, but as the moon drifted behind a cloud, the temperature did indeed drop, as I was suddenly surrounded by pitch darkness. Unable to bring myself to even slow my hectic pace, as I was now shivering, despite my exhaustion, the toe of my boot caught on a rock, and I stumbled, then fell to the gravel. The earth itself felt jagged and harsh beneath my unprotected hands. Now that I no longer had the heat of my exertions to keep me warm, the chill deepened further, and the earth itself seemed to draw heat from my body. That same lonely nightbird cried once more. Then there was silence. It was a wrong silence, the kind of silence that never exists in the outdoors. The hitherto unnoticed crickets ceased their susurrus. The herd but unseen cows stopped their lowing, and the moon came out from its dark reverie behind the cloud. I froze. There I was, face down in the gravel road, frozen to the spot, the chill seeming to sucking the life from my body, stricken with an unmanning dread, for the newly re-illuminated road now had a shadow in it, a shadow that was standing over me, a tiny, child-sized shadow, but a formless, lifeless shadow just standing there in the middle of the road above me, and I got the sense that it was looking at me. We stayed there for I don't know how long, a motionless, silent plateau. Then, after what seemed an eternity, I moved. I looked up at it. In the dark, it was impossible to see if there were any features beyond the darkness, but it was human in shape, if not in actuality. There were 2 arms, 2 legs, and definitely a head. As I moved, though, it did too, and wordlessly nodded behind me. For the first time since this unearthly silence had struck me, I heard a sound. Low, thudding, and menacing. It was the growl of some beast. If I truly had to categorize the sound, I would place it as vaguely canine in nature, but this was a sound that came from no earthly creature. I spun around to face whatever was there, flipping over on my back to ward off an attack, to find nothing there, just an empty, moonlit road. I twisted my head around to where the child apparition had been, but there was naught but empty air. The wind blew, and for the first time, I realized how still the last few minutes had been. I gingerly arose from my prone position, my eyes constantly roving for any evidence of my strange companions, but there was nothing there. The nameless night bird hooted a 3rd time, and as if by prearranged signal, the crickets and cows resumed their merriment as if it had never been interrupted. I ran and ran, and I refused to look back, even when I could have sworn I could hear the sounds of some enormous beast chasing, its mouth frothing at the thrill of the chase, its jaws nipping at the air just behind my heels. Then, in the distance, streetlights beckoned me, calling me ever closer, and I felt hope surge in my panicked heart. In a few instants, I was somehow back amidst familiar territory, my way back to that unearthly field, lost in the twistings and turnings of the bitumed streets. As if I had crossed some kind of spiritual barrier that my terror and the cold could not pass, warmth slowly returned to my body. I found myself flushed and sweating. I hailed the first cab I saw and paid via my credit card. Let the consequences be damned. It was worth the money. I stumbled into my unit. My kid sister Eliza was asleep on the couch, with the television still running, bathing the living room in an eerie light. I didn't want to wake her up, so I tiptoed past her to my bedroom, where I fell into a fitful yet dreamless slumber. I awoke late the next day to the sounds of banging on the front door. The previous night's misadventure seemed all too easily forgotten in the bright sunshine of daylight. I groggily arose from my cocoon of blankets and pillows. I noticed on the way to the door, Eliza was still asleep on the couch. How in God's name could anyone sleep through this racket? I wondered. I unlatched the door. There was a policeman with a grim look on his face. "Robert McIntyre?" I nodded, unsure what this was about, still half asleep and confused. "We've had reports of strange animal noises coming from the house for most of the night. Do you have a dog?" I did a double take, thoroughly confused. I answered, "No, sir. Not at all. I haven't heard a thing. Eliza, have you heard anything?" She didn't answer. An all too familiar feeling of unease came over me, and the temperature seemed to drop. "Eliza?" I turned, walked over to the couch, then fell back aghast. The policeman came running into the room at my strangled cry. They never found the animal that did it, nor could they figure out how it had gotten into and out of the house, nor how I had managed to sleep through the doubtless bestial struggle that ensued as some form of dog tore the throat out of my kid sister. They never will either, and I will never know why it didn't take me, nor why I was chosen. But I was. Beware, dear reader. There are fiends, specters, and apparitions in this universe for whom